I never thought parking my own truck on my own property would nearly bankrupt me, but apparently Brenda Morrison of the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association had other plans. Let me back up. My name is Warren Olsen, and I have been running a snow removal business in northern Minnesota for the past 8 years. When I say northern Minnesota, I mean the kind of place where winter is not just a season but a way of life. We are talking about Duluth, where Lake Superior dumps snow on us like it is going out of style, and temperatures regularly hit negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. My business, Olsen Snow Services, had grown from just me and a beat-up pickup with a plow to a legitimate operation with 3 full-sized plow trucks, 2 smaller vehicles for residential driveways, and contracts with half the businesses in town. 3 years ago, I bought a house in Pine Ridge Estates, a newer development on the outskirts of Duluth. The neighborhood was nice enough, with modern houses, well-maintained streets, and that suburban charm that appeals to young families and professionals. The houses were not mansions by any stretch, mostly 3-bedroom colonials and split levels in the $200,000 to $300,000 range. When I purchased the property, I read through the HOA documents like any sensible person would. There were the usual rules about lawn maintenance: no weird paint colors, no boats or RVs visible from the street, that sort of thing. I specifically looked for anything about commercial vehicles, and there was a clause that said no commercial vehicles could be parked on the street overnight. Fair enough. My driveway was plenty big enough for my personal truck, and I kept all my plow trucks at a storage facility I rented on the industrial side of town. For 3 years, everything was fine. I paid my HOA dues on time, kept my lawn pristine, and never caused any trouble. I knew Brenda Morrison was the HOA president because she had personally welcomed me to the neighborhood when I moved in, handing me a basket of muffins and a 3-page typed letter outlining all the community standards. She was exactly what you would picture when you think HOA president. A woman in her early 50s with that specific haircut that demanded to speak to managers everywhere, always wearing bright-colored cardigans and those chunky statement necklaces from department stores. She seemed pleasant enough at first, if a bit intense about the flower bed requirements. Everything changed this past October. My storage facility, the place where I had been keeping my fleet for years, got sold to a development company. They were tearing it down to build luxury condos, because apparently Duluth needed more overpriced waterfront housing. I got 60 days notice, which sounds like plenty of time until you try to find commercial vehicle storage in a city where every available space gets snapped up before winter hits. I called every storage place, every lot, every facility within 20 miles. Everything was full, waitlisted, or prohibitively expensive. One place wanted $400 per vehicle per month, which would have been nearly $1,500 a month just for parking. That was more than my mortgage. With winter bearing down and my storage situation getting desperate, I made a decision. My property was a corner lot with an oversized driveway and a decent-sized side yard. The previous owners had apparently wanted space for an RV, so they had poured extra concrete and even run it along the side of the house. I measured it out, and I could fit 2 of my plow trucks there comfortably without blocking the sidewalk or being too visible from the main street. They would technically be on my property in my driveway, not on the street. According to the HOA rules as I understood them, that should have been fine. I moved 2 trucks to my house on November 3rd. These were not small vehicles. They were Ford F-550s with 8-foot plow blades, commercial-grade sanders in the beds, and enough lighting to make them visible from space. But they were clean, well-maintained, and I kept them parked neatly on the concrete pad. My plan was to keep looking for storage and hopefully find something by mid-season, when some of the smaller operations shut down for financial reasons. It happened every year. Brenda showed up at my door on November 5th at 7 in the morning. I was having coffee before heading out to prep equipment for the season when my doorbell rang insistently. That kind of aggressive ringing that tells you someone is not just stopping by to chat. I opened the door to find Brenda standing there with her phone out, clearly having just taken photos of my trucks. She was wearing a purple cardigan and white pants despite the cold, and her expression was the kind of pinched anger that I associated with people who had never been told no in their entire lives. "Mr. Olsen," she said, not even bothering with a greeting. "We need to discuss your parking situation immediately." "Good morning to you too, Brenda," I said, keeping my voice level. "What seems to be the problem?" "The problem," she said, gesturing dramatically toward my driveway, "is that you have commercial vehicles parked on your property in clear violation of our HOA covenants." I leaned against the doorframe. "The covenant says no commercial vehicles on the street overnight." "These are in my driveway, on my property." "The spirit of the rule is clearly about maintaining the aesthetic quality of our neighborhood," Brenda said, and I could hear the rehearsed quality to her words, like she had practiced this speech. "Those trucks are an eyesore and they lower property values for everyone in Pine Ridge Estates. They are work vehicles that are clean and well maintained," I said. "I am not running a chop shop here, Brenda. I have a legitimate business and I am in a temporary bind with storage." "Temporary or not, they need to be moved immediately," she said. "I am giving you 48 hours to remove them or the HOA will begin issuing fines." "Fines for what exactly?" I asked. "Show me in the covenant where it says I cannot park vehicles in my own driveway." She pulled out her phone and started scrolling. Section 7, Paragraph 3, states that no commercial activity shall be conducted on the premises in a manner that creates a nuisance or negatively impacts the residential character of the community. "I am not conducting commercial activity here," I said. "I am parking vehicles. I do not run my business from this address. I have an office downtown. This is just parking." "The HOA board will be voting on this matter at our meeting next week," Brenda said, her voice taking on that officious tone that people use when they want you to know they have power over you. "In the meantime, I strongly suggest you make other arrangements." "I will look into it," I said, which was not a lie. I was looking into it. I just was not finding anything. She left, and I went about my day. The first real snow of the season was forecast for the following week, and I needed to make sure all my equipment was ready. My contract started up as soon as accumulation hit 2 inches, which meant I needed to have everything prepared. I had a crew of 4 guys who worked for me during the season, all experienced operators who knew the routes. We had commercial lots, several apartment complexes, and a contract with the county for some of the rural roads on the outskirts of town. The HOA meeting happened on November 12th. I did not attend because I was working. We had gotten 6 inches of snow overnight, and I had been out since 3 in the morning clearing parking lots. By the time I got home at noon, exhausted and ready to crash, there was a letter taped to my front door. The letter informed me that the HOA board had voted unanimously to enforce the commercial vehicle ban, interpreting the covenants to include any commercial vehicles visible from the street, regardless of whether they were parked in a driveway or on the street itself. I was being fined $50 per day per vehicle until they were removed. That was $100 a day, $3,000 a month, for parking on my own property. I called the number listed for HOA inquiries, which rang through to Brenda's cell phone. She answered on the third ring. "Brenda, this is Warren Olsen. I just got your letter about the fines." "Yes, Mr. Olsen. As I explained, the board voted on this matter." $100 a day is insane," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "That is more than most people's mortgage payments over a month." "Then I suggest you find alternative parking," she said. "The rules exist for a reason. I have been looking. Everything is full or too expensive." "That sounds like a personal problem, not an HOA problem," Brenda said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "You have until the end of the week to comply." I hung up and immediately called my lawyer, a guy named Tom Hendricks who had helped me with business incorporation and contracts. I explained the situation, sent him photos of the letter and the relevant HOA documents. Tom called me back 2 hours later. "This is tricky, Warren. Technically, HOA covenants are legally binding contracts. If they are interpreting the rules this way and the board voted on it, you might have a hard time fighting it. So I am just supposed to pay $3,000 a month to park on my own property. You could contest it, but that means going to court, and HOA litigation can drag on for months or years. In the meantime, the fines would keep accumulating. My advice: find somewhere else to park the trucks, and then maybe we can negotiate the fines down after the fact." But that was easier said than done. I spent the next week making calls, driving around to look at potential spots, even considering just parking them on the street downtown and risking tickets, which would probably be cheaper than the HOA fines. Nothing worked out. Meanwhile, Brenda was true to her word. On November 20th, I received an invoice for $700, covering a week of fines. The letter stated that payment was due within 30 days and that failure to pay would result in a lien being placed on my property. I was furious, but I was also stuck. And then, on November 23rd, we got hit with a massive winter storm. 14 inches of snow in 12 hours, winds gusting to 40 miles per hour, whiteout conditions. It was the kind of storm that made the local news and shut down schools and businesses. It was also the kind of storm that made me a lot of money because everyone needed their lots and driveways cleared. I was out for 18 hours straight, running routes with my crew. We cleared commercial lots, residential streets under contract, everything on our list. By the time I got home at midnight, I was dead tired but satisfied. We had done good work, and my clients were happy. I pulled into my driveway and noticed something odd. The streets in Pine Ridge Estates were completely untouched. There were 14 inches of snow covering every road, no tire tracks except for the ones I was making, no sign that any plows had come through. The main roads in Duluth had been cleared hours ago. The highways were treated and salted, but here in my own neighborhood, nothing. The next morning, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. It was my neighbor, Phil Richards, who lived 2 houses down. "Warren, hey, sorry to bother you so early. Do you know when the neighborhood streets are getting plowed? I need to get to work and I cannot get my car out of the driveway." I rubbed my eyes. "Phil, I do not handle the neighborhood streets. That should be either the city or whoever the HOA contracts with." I called the city, and they said Pine Ridge Estates is a private community and we are responsible for our own snow removal. That woke me up. "Say that again." "The city does not plow our streets. Apparently it is in the HOA contract. We are supposed to handle it ourselves." I got off the phone and did some digging. Sure enough, buried in the HOA documents was a section about snow removal. Pine Ridge Estates was built as a private community, which meant the streets were technically private roads, not city property. The HOA was responsible for maintenance, which included snow removal. I went deeper into the documents and found references to a snow removal contract, but no details about who held it. I called Brenda. She did not answer. I called the HOA main number. Voicemail. I sent an email. No response. By noon, my phone was blowing up with calls and texts from neighbors. No one could get out of the neighborhood. The snow had gotten packed down by the few cars that had tried to leave, turning it into rutted ice. People were missing work, unable to get groceries, stuck. Finally, at 2 in the afternoon, Brenda sent out a mass email to all residents. The email explained that the HOA's snow removal contractor had gone out of business unexpectedly at the end of last season, and they had been unable to secure a replacement before winter started. They were working on finding a new contractor, but in the meantime, residents were encouraged to help clear the streets if possible. I stared at that email for a long time. The irony was almost beautiful. The HOA was fining me for parking my plow trucks in my driveway, while simultaneously having no solution for plowing the neighborhood streets. I had the equipment, the expertise, and the crew to clear every street in Pine Ridge Estates in a few hours. But I was being penalized for even having that equipment visible. An idea formed in my mind. It was petty, sure, but it was also perfectly legal. I did not offer to plow the neighborhood streets. I did not volunteer my services. I simply moved my 2 plow trucks from my driveway to the storage facility lot of a buddy of mine who owed me a favor and had a tiny bit of space he could spare for a few weeks. It cost me, but it was cheaper than the HOA fines. The trucks were gone from my property by November 25th. Brenda sent me an email that evening. "Thank you for complying with the HOA regulations, Mr. Olsen. Your outstanding fines total $700. Please remit payment at your earliest convenience." I did not respond. The snow kept coming. Minnesota winter does not mess around, and that year was shaping up to be particularly brutal. We got another 8 inches on November 28th, then 6 inches on December 2nd, then a big storm on December 7th that dropped 12 more inches. Each time I was out with my crew, handling all our contracts, making money, keeping our clients happy. And each time I drove back into Pine Ridge Estates to find the streets completely untouched. The neighborhood was becoming increasingly impassable. The snow was piling up, getting packed down by the few brave souls who tried to drive through it, turning into treacherous ruts and ice. People were parking at the entrance of the neighborhood and walking to their houses. I saw neighbors out there with shovels, trying to clear the streets by hand, which was completely futile. You cannot shovel a quarter-mile of residential streets with hand tools. My own driveway I kept immaculate. I had a small ATV with a plow blade for personal use, and I made sure my driveway and walkway were always clear. I could get in and out without any issues because I just drove my personal truck, a regular F-150 without a plow, which I kept at home. My work truck stayed at my buddy's lot across town. The neighborhood Facebook group, which I had mostly ignored up until this point, became a source of daily entertainment. People were posting constantly about the snow situation. When is the HOA going to plow the streets? This is unacceptable. I called Brenda Morrison 3 times and she will not call me back. My elderly mother lives with me, and we cannot get her to her doctor appointments. This is what we pay HOA dues for, streets we cannot even drive on. Brenda would occasionally post responses, always variations on the same theme. They were working on it. They were getting quotes from contractors. It was a difficult situation. Please be patient. On December 10th, she posted that they had gotten quotes from 3 different snow removal companies. The cheapest quote was $15,000 for the rest of the season, which would require a special assessment since it was not in the current budget. There would be a vote at the next HOA meeting on December 18th. I could have solved their problem for half that price. I probably would have done it for even less since I already had to be out plowing anyway, and Pine Ridge Estates was literally where I lived. But nobody asked me. In fact, the one time a neighbor, a woman named Susan who lived across the street, suggested in the Facebook group that maybe I could help since I owned a snow removal business. Brenda shut it down immediately. Mr. Olsen has made it clear through his past actions that he does not respect the community standards of Pine Ridge Estates, Brenda wrote. The HOA will be contracting with a professional service that understands the importance of maintaining our neighborhood's character. I screenshot that comment and sent it to Tom, my lawyer, with a note. Is this defamation? Probably not actionable, he wrote back. But save everything. Document everything. This might get interesting. December 18th arrived and I actually went to the HOA meeting this time. It was held in the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that mostly got used for the occasional garage sale or kids' birthday parties. About 40 people showed up, which was a huge turnout considering the neighborhood had maybe 90 houses total. Brenda ran the meeting with the kind of forced cheerfulness that people use when they are pretending everything is fine. She went through the usual boring stuff, minutes from the last meeting, treasurer's report, a discussion about the holiday decorating contest. Then she got to the snow removal issue. As you all know, we have had an unusual situation this winter with our snow removal services, she said. The board has obtained quotes from 3 reputable companies, and we are recommending going with Superior Snow Pros, who have quoted $15,000 for full service through the end of March. A man in the front row, someone I did not know, raised his hand. $15,000. That is going to be what, an extra $150 per household, approximately, yes, Brenda said. It is an unfortunate situation but necessary. What about Warren Olsen? Someone else called out. I turned to see it was Phil Richards. He lives right here in the neighborhood and runs a snow removal business. Why are not we using him? Brenda's expression tightened. Mr. Olsen has demonstrated a disregard for our community standards. The board does not feel comfortable entering into a business relationship with someone who cannot respect the rules. I stood up. All eyes turned to me. For the record, I would be happy to provide snow removal services to the neighborhood at a competitive rate. I could start tomorrow, and I would charge $8,000 for the rest of the season. There was an immediate buzz of conversation. $8,000 versus $15,000 was a significant difference. Brenda banged her gavel, an actual wooden gavel she had brought. Mr. Olsen, you are out of order. This is not an open negotiation. I am a homeowner here, I said calmly. I am allowed to speak at HOA meetings. It says so right in the bylaws, section 12. Her face was turning red. Your proposal is noted. However, the board has already made its recommendation. We need to vote on the special assessment for Superior Snow Pros. I move to table the vote until we can get a proper proposal from Mr. Olsen, Phil said, clearly enjoying himself. I second that, Susan called out. Brenda looked like she had swallowed a lemon. Fine. We will table the snow removal vote until the January meeting. In the meantime, residents will need to continue managing as best they can. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that, with people arguing about the snow, the costs, and whether the board was being reasonable. I left after about 20 minutes, having made my point. The next day, Brenda sent me an email. Mr. Olsen, the board is willing to consider a proposal for snow removal services. Please submit a detailed quote including scope of work, timeline, and pricing. I took my time with it. I put together a professional proposal, outlining exactly what I would do, when I would do it, and how much it would cost. $8,000 for full service through March, which included plowing after any accumulation over 2 inches, salting and sanding as needed, and clearing the main roads plus the cul-de-sacs. I would guarantee response within 6 hours of snow stopping. It was a good deal, well below market rate for what I was offering. I submitted the proposal on December 20th. Brenda acknowledged receipt, and then I heard nothing. Christmas came and went. We had snow on Christmas Eve, another 6 inches. The neighborhood streets were now completely impassable except for trucks and SUVs with 4-wheel drive. I saw someone get stuck in the middle of the main road, their sedan just sitting there spinning its wheels until some neighbors came out to push them free. The Facebook group was absolutely losing its mind. People were demanding emergency HOA meetings, threatening to withhold dues, talking about getting lawyers involved. Brenda kept posting the same message over and over. The board was reviewing proposals. They would make a decision soon. Please be patient. On December 30th, I got another email from Brenda. Dear Mr. Olsen, after careful consideration, the board has decided to decline your proposal for snow removal services. We will be moving forward with superior snow pros pending the vote at the January meeting. Additionally, please be advised that you still owe $700 in fines from November. This amount is now 60 days past due. If payment is not received by January 15th, the HOA will initiate lien proceedings against your property. I called Tom immediately and read him the email. They are really going to put a lien on my house for $700. They can try, Tom said. But here is the thing, Warren. I have been looking into this, and I think they have been overstepping their authority. The covenant language about commercial vehicles is vague, and there is no case law in Minnesota supporting the kind of interpretation they are using. If they try to lien your property, we can fight it, and we will probably win. How long will that take? Months, maybe a year. But in the meantime, they cannot actually foreclose on a lien for something this small. And the more they push this, the worse they look, especially given the snow situation. So what should I do, personally? I would let them make the next move. Do not pay the fine. If they file a lien, we will challenge it. In the meantime, document everything. Every email, every Facebook post, every interaction. If this goes to court, you want a paper trail showing how unreasonable they have been. I took his advice. I did not pay the fine. I also did not offer again to plow the streets. I just went about my business, working my regular contracts, making money, and watching the neighborhood slowly become buried under snow. The January HOA meeting was scheduled for January 15th. I marked it on my calendar and planned to attend. But before that meeting could happen, things took a turn. On January 8th, we got hit with another major storm. This one was worse than the November storm, 16 inches of heavy, wet snow, the kind that is brutal to move and weighs a ton. Temperatures dropped to negative 15 degrees Fahrenheit after the snow stopped, with wind chills hitting negative 40. It was dangerous weather, the kind where exposed skin can get frostbite in minutes. I was out for 22 hours straight with my crew, clearing everything on our contract list. We made multiple passes on some of the commercial lots because the snow was so heavy. By the time I finally got home at 4 in the morning on January 9th, I was so tired I could barely see straight. I pulled into Pine Ridge Estates, which now looked like something out of an Arctic expedition. The snow on the streets had to be at least 2 feet deep in places, hard packed and icy. My truck, with 4-wheel drive and good tires, could barely make it through. I saw several cars just abandoned on the side of the road, buried in snow, unable to move. When I woke up at noon that day, my phone had 37 missed calls and 60-plus text messages. I scrolled through them, increasingly alarmed. One of our elderly neighbors, a man named Harold Chen who lived at the far end of the neighborhood, had suffered a heart attack during the night. His wife had called 911, but the ambulance could not get into the neighborhood because of the snow. They had to stage at the entrance, almost a quarter-mile away. Paramedics had walked in, carrying their equipment, but the delay had been significant. Harold was alive, but he had been taken to the hospital in serious condition. The neighborhood Facebook group was absolutely exploding. People were furious, scared, and demanding immediate action. Someone had called the local news, and there were reporters posting about the situation. Elderly man nearly dies after ambulance cannot access neighborhood due to snow, was the headline on the Duluth Tribune's website. Brenda posted a message saying the HOA was treating this as an emergency situation and had authorized Superior Snow Pros to begin work immediately, before the vote. They would start plowing that afternoon, except Superior Snow Pros did not start that afternoon. They did not start the next day either. I learned through the neighborhood gossip chain that Superior Snow Pros had looked at the situation and said it would take them days to clear all the streets, and they wanted to renegotiate their price. The snow was worse than they had anticipated, and they did not have enough equipment to handle it quickly. They wanted $25,000, not $15,000. The board was apparently in crisis mode, trying to figure out what to do. Meanwhile, the streets remained impassable. On January 10th, I got a call from Phil Richards. "Warren, a bunch of us neighbors are talking. We want to hire you directly to plow the streets. Forget the HOA. We will pay you out of pocket." "Phil, I appreciate that, but it does not work that way. The streets are HOA property. I cannot just go plow them without authorization. What if we get enough people to sign a petition? Still would not matter. The HOA board has to authorize it." Phil was quiet for a moment. "This is insane. We are trapped in our own neighborhood and Brenda is playing power games." "Yeah," I said. "I know." That afternoon, I was sitting in my living room when I saw a news van pull up outside. A reporter and cameraman got out and started filming the street conditions. Then they came to my door. The reporter was a young woman named Jennifer Park from Channel 6 News. "Mr. Olsen, I am Jennifer Park with Channel 6. Do you have a moment to talk about the snow situation in Pine Ridge Estates?" "How did you get my name?" I asked. "Several of your neighbors mentioned that you own a snow removal company and have offered to plow the streets, but the HOA turned you down. Is that accurate?" I considered for a moment. Tom had said to document everything. Maybe it was time to go public. "Yeah, that is accurate," I said. "I submitted a proposal to plow the neighborhood streets for $8,000. The HOA rejected it and is trying to hire another company for significantly more money." "And you live here in the neighborhood?" "I do. Right here on Maple Street." "Can you tell me about what happened with the ambulance last night?" I told her what I knew, which was not much beyond what everyone else knew. She asked if I would be willing to do an on-camera interview. I agreed. The segment aired that evening on the 6 o'clock news. It was a pretty damning piece. They showed footage of the impassable streets, interviewed Harold Chen's wife about the ambulance delay, and then cut to my interview where I explained that I had offered to plow for $8,000 but was rejected. They reached out to Brenda for comment, and she had given them a written statement about how the board was working diligently to resolve the situation and had the community's best interests at heart. The story got picked up by other local news outlets. By the next morning, it was on social media and getting shared widely. The narrative was pretty clear. An HOA was so focused on rules and aesthetics that they rejected help from a qualified local business owner, and now residents were suffering. My phone started ringing with calls from other reporters wanting interviews. I did a few more, always keeping my tone reasonable and factual. I never attacked Brenda personally. I just stated the facts. I had offered to help. I was rejected. The streets were impassable. People were suffering. On January 12th, I got an email from a lawyer I did not know, a woman named Patricia Walsh. She was representing a group of 15 homeowners in Pine Ridge Estates who were filing a lawsuit against the HOA board for negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. They wanted to know if I would be willing to testify about my rejected proposal and the board's handling of the snow situation. I forwarded the email to Tom. He called me within an hour. "This is getting serious, Warren. If you testify in this lawsuit, you are going to make enemies on the board." "I think I already have enemies on the board," I said. "Fair point. My advice is to cooperate if you are comfortable with it. This is a legitimate legal action, and your testimony would be relevant. Plus, it might put pressure on the board to actually do something about the snow." I agreed to cooperate. Patricia Walsh sent over a formal request for information, and I provided copies of all my correspondence with the HOA, my proposal, and the timeline of events. The January 15th HOA meeting was canceled. Brenda sent out an email saying that, due to the ongoing emergency situation and pending legal matters, the board was postponing all non-essential business. However, she announced that they had reached an agreement with a different snow removal company, Arctic Plow Services out of Superior, Wisconsin, who would begin clearing the streets on January 16th for a price of $18,000. The streets finally got plowed on January 16th, more than 5 weeks after the first major snow. It took Arctic Plow Services 3 full days to clear everything because the snow was so packed down and icy. The whole neighborhood watched as massive plows and loaders worked their way through street by street, finally making the roads passable again. People were relieved, but they were also angry. $18,000 meant a special assessment of about $200 per household on top of the regular HOA dues. And everyone knew it could have been done for less than half that price weeks earlier if the board had accepted my proposal. The lawsuit against the HOA board moved forward. I gave a deposition in early February, explaining the whole situation to Patricia Walsh and her team. They were building a case that the board had acted negligently and against the interests of the community by rejecting a reasonable offer for snow removal services based on personal animosity. Meanwhile, the $700 fine the HOA claimed I owed was still hanging over me. On January 15th, the deadline Brenda had given me, I received a notice that the HOA was filing a lien against my property for non-payment of fines. Tom immediately filed a challenge, arguing that the fines were improperly assessed and that the HOA had overstepped its authority. That challenge turned into its own legal proceeding. We ended up in front of a judge in early March for a hearing on whether the lien was valid. The hearing was in St. Louis County District Court in Duluth. Tom represented me, and the HOA had hired their own lawyer, a stern-looking man in his 60s named Robert Cranston. We sat in a small courtroom while Judge Margaret Foster reviewed the documents. Tom argued that the HOA covenant language about commercial vehicles was ambiguous and that my trucks had been parked entirely on my own property, not on the street. He pointed out that the HOA board had interpreted the rules in an overly broad manner specifically to target me. He also brought up the snow removal situation, arguing that it demonstrated a pattern of the board acting against my interests for personal, rather than legitimate community reasons. Cranston argued that HOA covenants were binding contracts, and that the board had the authority to interpret and enforce the rules as they saw fit. He said that my trucks were clearly commercial vehicles, and that allowing them to be visible from the street did negatively impact the community's aesthetic character. Judge Foster listened to both sides, asked a few questions, and then took the matter under advisement. She said she would issue a written ruling within 2 weeks. While we were waiting for the judge's decision, the broader lawsuit against the HOA board was heating up. More homeowners had joined, bringing the total to 23 plaintiffs. They were seeking damages for the special assessment costs, compensation for lost wages and other expenses related to being trapped in the neighborhood, and removal of the current board members for breach of fiduciary duty. The local media was still covering the story periodically, especially after the lawsuit expanded. It had become a cautionary tale about HOA overreach and the dangers of petty power games. On March 18th, Judge Foster issued her ruling on the lien. She sided with me on almost every point. She found that the HOA covenant language was indeed ambiguous regarding vehicles parked in driveways versus on streets. She found that the board had not properly notified me of the rule interpretation before assessing fines. And she found that the $50 per day per vehicle fine was excessive and potentially punitive rather than compensatory. The lien was declared invalid and removed from my property. Additionally, the judge ordered the HOA to pay my legal fees, which had run about $3,000 at that point. I got the news from Tom via email and immediately called him. "We won. You won," he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. The judge really raked the HOA over the coals in her written opinion. She basically said they acted arbitrarily and capriciously. Does this affect the bigger lawsuit? Probably helps it. It establishes that the board was acting inappropriately, at least regarding you. Patricia Walsh is probably very happy right now. The HOA's legal problems were just getting started. In early April, the Minnesota Attorney General's office announced they were opening an investigation into Pine Ridge Estates HOA following complaints from residents. Apparently, when multiple people started digging into the HOA's finances as part of the lawsuit, some irregularities had been discovered. It turned out that Brenda Morrison, as HOA president, had been authorizing payments to various vendors without proper board approval. Some of those vendors had connections to her family. Her brother-in-law owned a landscaping company that had been getting paid for services that neighbors said were never performed. There were invoices for community improvements that no one could actually identify. The AG's investigation took several months, but by August, the findings were released. Brenda had embezzled approximately $45,000 from the HOA over a 3-year period through fake invoices and improper payments. It was not a massive amount, but it was enough to constitute felony theft under Minnesota law. Brenda Morrison was arrested on August 7th. The news showed footage of her being led out of her house in handcuffs, looking shell-shocked. She was charged with theft by swindle and misconduct by a corporate officer. Her bail was set at $10,000. The arrest made the news cycle all over again, bringing the whole Pine Ridge Estates saga back into the spotlight. The story now had everything: HOA tyranny, snow removal drama, embezzlement, and an arrest. Local news stations did retrospectives on the whole situation, and I got calls from reporters asking for comment. I kept my statements brief and professional. I am glad the truth came out. Hopefully, the community can move forward now in a positive direction. The criminal case against Brenda moved through the system relatively quickly. She tried to fight the charges initially, but the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, invoices, emails, all of it painting a clear picture of deliberate fraud. In October, she accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to felony theft and was sentenced to 2 years in prison with 1 year suspended, plus 5 years probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution of $45,000 to the HOA. The civil lawsuit against the HOA board was settled around the same time. The HOA's insurance carrier, not wanting to risk going to trial, agreed to pay out a settlement that covered the excessive special assessment costs and some additional damages. Each of the plaintiff households got about $1,500. It was not a fortune, but it was something. More importantly, the entire HOA board was removed and new elections were held. Phil Richards ended up running for president and won. One of his first acts was to formally apologize to me on behalf of the HOA for how I had been treated. He called me in November, almost exactly a year after the whole mess started. "Warren, the new board wants to make this right. We are canceling any and all fines that were assessed against you, and we would like to offer you a contract for snow removal services this winter if you are interested." I laughed. "Phil, I appreciate that, but I actually found a good storage facility last spring. My trucks are not at my house anymore anyway. Still, if you want the contract, it is yours. We will pay fair market rate." I thought about it. Part of me wanted to tell them to find someone else, that they had burned that bridge. But the truth was, they were my neighbors. Most of them had supported me through all this. It was Brenda and her cronies on the old board who had been the problem, and they were gone now. "Tell you what," I said. "I will do it for cost. No markup, no profit, just my expenses and labor. Call it a community service." "Warren, you do not have to do that." "I know. But I want to. We all live here. We should take care of each other." We worked out the details over the following week. I drew up a contract that was fair and reasonable, and the new board approved it unanimously. When the first snow fell in late November, I was out there with my crew, clearing the Pine Ridge Estates streets along with all our other contracts. The neighborhood looked different that winter. People were friendlier, more willing to help each other out. There was a sense that we had been through something together and come out better for it. The new HOA board was transparent about finances, held regular meetings, and actually listened to residents. I kept my trucks at the storage facility I had found. My driveway stayed clear of commercial vehicles, not because anyone was making me, but because it just worked better that way. Sometimes, I would see people driving past my house slowly, like they were looking for the infamous Plow trucks that had started the whole saga. They were always disappointed to find just a regular suburban house with a neat lawn and a normal pickup in the driveway. Brenda Morrison served 8 months in county jail before being released on probation. I heard she moved away from Duluth after she got out, somewhere down to the Twin Cities. I never saw her again. The Pine Ridge Estates saga became something of a local legend in Duluth. People would bring it up at city council meetings when discussing HOA regulations. It got mentioned in a Minnesota public radio piece about HOA overreach. I even had a law professor from the University of Minnesota contact me because he was using the case in a class about property law and covenant enforcement. For me, life went back to normal, or as normal as it gets when you run a snow removal business in northern Minnesota. My company kept growing. I added another truck to the fleet and hired 2 more seasonal employees. My contracts expanded to include more commercial properties, and even a deal with one of the school districts. Every time it snowed, I would plow the Pine Ridge Estate's streets first before handling my other contracts. It became a point of pride for me. These were my neighbors, my community. Taking care of them was not just a job, it was the right thing to do. Sometimes on quiet nights when I was out plowing at 3 in the morning, I would think about how close I had come to just moving away from Pine Ridge Estates during the worst of the conflict. It would have been easier in some ways. No fight with the HOA, no legal bills, no stress. But I would have been giving up, letting them push me out of my own home because I did not fit their narrow definition of acceptable. Standing my ground had been hard. It had cost me money, time, and a lot of stress. But it had been worth it. Not just because I won in the end, but because it had exposed real problems in how the HOA was being run. If I had just paid the fines and moved my trucks without fighting back, Brenda would probably still be embezzling money. The board would still be making arbitrary decisions. Residents would still be stuck with a dysfunctional HOA. Sometimes doing the right thing means being stubborn. It means refusing to back down even when it would be easier. It means standing up for principle even when the cost is high. The winter after the saga, we had one of the heaviest snow seasons on record in Duluth. We got storm after storm, each one dumping 6 to 12 inches. It was brutal, exhausting work, but every time I cleared the Pine Ridge Estate's streets and saw my neighbors able to get to work, get their kids to school, go about their normal lives, I felt good about it. One evening in February, I was finishing up a plowing run through the neighborhood when Phil flagged me down. I rolled down my window and he jogged over, bundled up in a massive winter coat. "Hey Warren, just wanted to say thanks. Streets look great." "Just doing my job," I said. "No, seriously. You did not have to take this contract, especially not at the rate you are giving us. We all appreciate it." "It is my community too," I said. "We take care of each other." He nodded, understanding. "That thing last year with Brenda and the old board, that was not us. That was not what Pine Ridge Estates is supposed to be about." "I know," I said, "and it is not anymore. You guys fixed it." "We all fixed it," he said. "You standing your ground, that started it. You could have just paid the fines and let it go." "Yeah," I said. "But then nothing would have changed," he smiled. "Damn right. Hey, we are having a neighborhood barbecue next month when the weather warms up. You are coming, right?" "Would not miss it," I said. As I drove away, continuing my plowing route, I realized that the whole experience had changed how I thought about community. It is easy to be part of a community when everything is going well, when everyone agrees, when there is no conflict. The hard part is staying engaged when things get difficult, when you disagree, when people are making decisions you think are wrong. A real community is not just people living near each other. It is people willing to fight for each other, to stand up when something is wrong, to do the hard work of making things better. It is messy and complicated and sometimes painful, but it is worth it. The Pine Ridge Estates HOA story could have ended a lot of different ways. I could have given up and moved. The board could have foreclosed on my property over unpaid fines. The embezzlement could have gone undiscovered. Harold Chen could have died because the ambulance could not get through. Instead, it ended with a community that was stronger, more engaged, and better governed. It ended with accountability for someone who had abused their power. It ended with neighbors who knew they could trust each other. And it ended with me, driving through my neighborhood at 4 in the morning, clearing snow from the streets, making sure my neighbors could live their lives safely. It was not glamorous work. Nobody was going to write songs about it or make movies about the guy who won a fight with his HOA and then plowed their streets. But it mattered. That is what I learned from the whole experience. The small stuff matters. Standing up for yourself matters. Being part of a real community matters. And sometimes, the best revenge is not revenge at all. It is just being a good neighbor, doing good work, and proving through your actions what kind of person you are. The plow trucks that started the whole mess were still sitting in storage across town, ready to go whenever the snow fell. They were just trucks, metal and machinery, nothing special. But they had become symbols of something bigger, a fight about property rights, community standards, and what it means to live together in a shared space. I never parked them in my driveway again, even though I legally could have after the judge's ruling. It was not worth the hassle, and honestly, the storage facility worked better for my business anyway. But knowing I could park them there if I wanted to, that was important. It was about principle. Spring came eventually, as it always does in Minnesota. The snow melted, the streets cleared, and life moved on. My plowing contract with Pine Ridge Estates would start up again next winter. The new HOA board was functioning well, making reasonable decisions, being transparent with the residents. Property values in the neighborhood had actually gone up slightly, despite or maybe because of all the drama and media attention. I ran into Susan from across the street at the grocery store in April. She recognized me in the produce section and came over to chat. "Warren, hey, how are you doing?" "Good, thanks. How are things?" "Really good, actually. The new board is so much better. Did you see they are planning to repave the main road this summer?" "I saw that email, yeah. Good idea, it was getting pretty rough." She hesitated, then said, "You know, a lot of us felt really bad about what happened with Brenda and the old board. We should have spoken up sooner." "You did speak up," I said. "You were one of the ones who suggested they hire me at that first meeting, remember?" "Yeah, but we could have done more. We could have pushed back harder." I shook my head. "You did what you could. Sometimes these things just have to play out. What matters is how it ended." "I guess so. Anyway, thank you for sticking with the neighborhood." A lot of people would have just moved away after all that. "This is my home," I said simply. "I am not going to let anyone push me out of my home," she smiled. "Well, we are glad you stayed." That conversation stuck with me. It reminded me that there had been good people in the neighborhood all along, people who had supported me even when it was not easy or popular. The problem had never been Pine Ridge Estates as a whole. It had been a few people in positions of power who let that power go to their heads. By the time summer arrived, the whole saga felt like ancient history. New families had moved into the neighborhood, people who had never heard about the HOA fight or Brenda's arrest or any of it. To them, Pine Ridge Estates was just a nice suburban neighborhood with well-maintained streets and reasonable HOA fees. I found myself grateful for that. Not because I wanted to forget what happened, but because it meant the community had moved on. We were not defined by that conflict anymore. We were just neighbors living our lives. The business kept me busy through the spring and summer. When you are not plowing snow, there is always equipment to maintain, contracts to negotiate, accounting to handle. I hired my first full-time, year-round employee in June, a woman named Linda who took over the administrative work so I could focus on operations. It was a big step for the company, a sign that we were growing beyond just a seasonal hustle into a real sustainable business. In August, I got a call from a reporter at Minnesota Business Magazine. They were doing a feature on small businesses that had overcome challenges, and they wanted to include my story. I agreed to an interview, figuring it might be good for business. The reporter, a guy named Kevin, came to my office downtown and we talked for about an hour. He asked about starting the business, growing it, the challenges of seasonal work. Eventually, he got around to asking about the HOA situation. "So that whole conflict with Pine Ridge Estates, did that end up hurting your business at all?" I thought about it. Honestly, no. If anything, it helped. I got a lot of media attention, and people saw that I was willing to stand up for what was right even when it cost me. That reputation for integrity has been good for business. You think HOAs serve a useful purpose? Some do, sure. When they are run well, they can maintain property values and provide services that benefit everyone. The problem is when you get people on the board who are more interested in power and control than in actually serving the community. That is when things go bad. What would you say to someone who is in a similar situation, fighting with their HOA over something? Document everything. Get a lawyer early. Stand your ground if you are in the right, but pick your battles carefully. And remember that at the end of the day, these are your neighbors. Try to find solutions that work for everyone if possible. The article came out in September and was pretty flattering. They portrayed me as a scrappy small business owner who had taken on an overbearing HOA and won. It was not quite that simple, but it made for a good story. I got a few new clients out of it, so I was not complaining. As fall approached and the weather started to cool, I began prepping for another winter season. Equipment maintenance, hiring seasonal staff, reviewing contracts. The Pine Ridge Estates contract was locked in, along with all my other regulars and a few new clients. On November 1st, we got our first snow of the season, just a dusting that did not require plowing. But it was a reminder that winter was coming, and with it, another season of long hours and hard work. I drove through Pine Ridge Estates that evening, just checking on things. The streets looked good. People's yards were neat. Holiday decorations were starting to go up, even though it was early. Everything looked normal, peaceful, like the previous winter's drama had never happened, but it had happened and I would never forget it. The experience had taught me things about standing up for yourself, about community, about the importance of good governance even in small organizations like an HOA. Those lessons had value beyond just the specific situation. When I got home that night, I sat in my driveway for a minute, looking at my house. It was a good house in a good neighborhood. I had fought to stay here, and I was glad I had. This was where I belonged. My phone buzzed with a text from Phil. "First snow, here we go, ready for another winter." I smiled and typed back, "Always ready, bring it on." And that was it really. Life moved forward. Winter would come, snow would fall, I would plow the streets. Next spring would arrive eventually, and we would do it all over again. That was life in northern Minnesota, predictable and harsh and beautiful all at once. The HOA fight was behind me now, resolved and settled. Brenda was gone, the old board was gone, the problems were fixed. What remained was just the daily work of living in a community, being a good neighbor, running a business, making a life. Sometimes I would think about how the whole thing could have gone differently. If I had just paid those fines, if I had found storage earlier, if I had moved away instead of fighting. But those were all paths not taken. The path I did take, the hard one, the one that required standing my ground and fighting for what was right, that was the path that led to where I was now. And where I was now was good. Business was solid. Relationships with my neighbors were strong. The community was healthy. That was worth all the stress and conflict and legal fees. So when people asked me about the HOA fight, which they still did occasionally, I always gave them the same advice. Stand up for yourself. Document everything. Get good legal help. But also, remember what you are fighting for. It is not about winning for the sake of winning. It is about creating the kind of community you want to live in. That is what I did. I fought for the right to park my own vehicles on my own property, sure. But more than that, I fought for accountability, for fairness, for a community that was governed well and treated its members with respect. And I won that fight, not just for myself, but for all my neighbors. The snow started falling harder as November turned into December. Winter had arrived in full force, and I was ready for it. Plow trucks maintained and waiting, crew hired and trained, routes planned out. Ready to clear the streets, keep the roads safe, take care of my community. That is what I do. That is who I am. And nobody, not even an overzealous HOA president with a grudge, was ever going to change that.